Got it. Okay, in the end of this week's Parsha, in Parshas Mishpatim, we have the end of the story of the giving of the Torah. There is a difference of opinion in the commentaries of exactly when this particular section was said. There are those that say that it was after the day that when Moshe came down with, when Moshe finished, God finished revealing himself to the Jewish people. So then God had told him to stay up with him, but he came down for a day and then went back up. According to others, this conversation that takes place, which I'll describe in a moment at the end of the Parsha, is really it happened before the Torah was given, and it really is a partner to last week's Parsha. When we tell over the story of the giving of the Torah, so we clearly written in last week's Parsha was the story of Moshe doing shuttle diplomacy between God and the Jewish people, bringing a message from God down to the Jews, the response of the Jews back to God, and all of that was a preparation for Kabbalas Torah, a preparation for the receiving of the Torah. In the end of this week's Parsha, we have a fascinating thing that happened that we were told that Moshe Rabbeinu, along with this conversation that was taking place, he wrote certain things down, and then it tells us that he built Shtei Misrei Matzeva l'Shnei Masar Shiftei Yisrael. He built a Vayiva Mizbeach Tachas Ha'ar. He built a altar under the mountain, and then he built 12 Matzevos, 12 monolithic stones, which we're going to see in a minute. It wasn't 12; it was actually 144. But whatever. And then he made a sacrifice. And he took part of the blood and he sprinkled it on the people, and then part of the blood and sprinkled it on the altar. And nowhere does that, when we tell over the story, we tell over the story to our children. When we've heard the story as children, that part wasn't part of the story. It's printed in this week's Parsha. And it's just a little bit of an anomaly that we sort of ignore this part when we tell the drama of the buildup to the giving of the Torah. We sort of forget about this very important fact that Moshe Rabbeinu built these matzevos, he built these monuments, and he built this mizbeach, he built this altar, and he made a sacrifice on it. And another anomaly is that if I were to ask you, what did the Jewish people say when they were given the Torah? So I think every person here would say, what do you mean, what did they say? You know, it's so basic, Na'aseh v'nishma. Everybody knows that. Well, if you looked in last week's Parsha when the Torah was given, you didn't see Na'aseh v'nishma. You saw Na'aseh. And if you look in this week's Parsha, you look at the end of the Parsha, chapter 24. So it's chapter 24, verse 1, verse 2. It says that he spoke to the people, and the people said, "Es kol hadvarim asher diber Hashem na'aseh." Everything God says, na'aseh. Again, only the na'aseh. And then only later, after Moshe Rabbeinu builds the Mizbeach, and he builds the monuments, in Pasuk Zayin, does it says, "Vayikach sefer habris vayikra b'yazni ha'am vayomru kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma." Only now did it say na'aseh v'nishma. Now, for many, this is going to be a total surprise because we just knew it as so basic that what did the Jews respond? And God loved that response. He thought it was amazing, na'aseh v'nishma. But we didn't say na'aseh v'nishma in the beginning. Our first thoughts about the Torah were na'aseh, we will do. Nishma was only really said afterwards, or said, closer to the giving of the Torah, but it wasn't the first reaction that we had. The first reaction that we had was Nasa. That's my first question. My second question is that Moshe was not the first person to build a Mizbeach or to build a Matzeva. We know that Noach built a Mizbeach, Avraham Avinu built 4 of them, Yitzchak built a Mizbeach, Yaakov built 2 of them, Moshe Rabbeinu built Mizbechos. Yaakov Avinu built also matzevos. He built these 1 stone monuments. He built it for the pact that he had made with Avimelech, and also he made it. He built this same kind of stone as a memorial to Rachel. The Torah also tells us about many occasions where these were built, but never are they built together. You either have a mizbeach or you have a matzeva, but never do you have the 2 of them together. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu build the 2 of them? A mizbeach was usually used to make offerings, sacrifices. A matzeva was usually made to make oil anointments. What was the necessity to have both of them together? My third problem. Why did he build 144 of them? It says in the Torah that he built 12 for the Shevet. And if you read the pasuk carefully, it can be read that he built 12 for each Shevet, for each tribe, which means he put up 144 matzevos, one mizbeach and 144 matzevos. Plus, you have to ask, why did he put up the mizbeach before he put up the matzeva? Was there any significance to the order of the things that he did? Okay. So I think that we have to understand a few things. The first thing is we have to understand the difference between a matzeva and a mizbeach. A matzeva, one stone, the Torah tells us that at some point, God hates the one stone monument. Now, it doesn't say a lot of places in the Torah that God hates things. We say that God's a jealous God, he's a kel kana, but he doesn't really use the word hate. By matzeva, it uses the word hate. What's such an anathema to God about a matzeva, about a one stone monument? Because what's a mizbech? A mizbech is an indication really of communal service and of a community fusing into one. And even within inside, as a representative of a person, of an individual human being, that we have so many different kochos, there are so many different capabilities that we have, so many different strengths that we have, and we take all of those strengths and fuse them together in our service of Hashem. It represents the mizbeach, the altar that we use to sacrifice, which was the way that we communicated with God, the way that we drew ourselves closer to God. The mizbeach represented a dynamic activity and connection to God. A matzeva was one stone. It was as if we were made, the matzeva made a statement that this is who I am, this is what I am. There's no dynamism, there's no active growth, there's no taking little pieces and putting them together and making something. This is the final product. And that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't love. When we say that we're done, that we've completed, we've become what we need to become. We have done asisi k'chol hashetziv yisani. I've done everything you wanted me to do. Then that's considered something that's an anathema to God, because we constantly, throughout our lives, as we've seen in the Mishnayos that we learned this week, throughout our lives, we constantly have to be growing and reaching new stages. What's fascinating is that what do we put up on a grave? On a grave, we put up a matzeva, one stone, because that's the moment in life when it's appropriate to say, I've arrived. This is who I am. This is what I've accomplished in my life. I'm not going to do any more. I'm not going to be able to accomplish more. And therefore, the proper representation of that stage in life is, in fact, a matzeva. But did you ever notice what we do when we go to visit a grave? We take stones and we put them on top of the matzeva. What's that custom? What's that about? And you see people religiously, some people will even bring stones. A, so they don't have to bend down, and B, so that they have the stones prepared with them. Why is it such a critical thing to put stones on? Because that person's life might have ended. That person, in their own sense, might be in fact a matzeva. But we now continue to be their mizbech, so to speak, where their personalities, where their values are now being offered on our own service to Hashem and our own relationship to God. And therefore, they actually still remain very dynamic. Not dynamic in what they do, but dynamic in what they have caused to happen. And by placing stones on top of matzeva, we say, yes, they're a matzeva, but we aren't a matzeva. We're still growing, and we're growing because of them. We're growing through them. We're growing with all of their efforts and everything that they've done. A mizbeach, when Yaakov Avinu lied down at night, the 12 stones that he placed around his head all formed into one stone. Yaakov Avinu had to put down 12, not put down one, because there has to be all these individual pieces, but all those individual pieces have to be gathered together to make one. A matzeva represents an individual's service to Hashem. A mizbeach represents a community's service to Hashem. And an individual's service to Hashem can't be just one flavor, just one picture, just one flat stone. And that's why God doesn't favor the flat stone. That's why God doesn't favor the matzeva. He favors the mizbeach, because our avoda, our service, our presence in this world, our activity in this world has to be dynamic and moving and constantly growing. At Har Sinai, we were standing at a moment where we had achieved absolute unity. The Torah tells us that the Jewish people, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, that the Jewish people slept under the mountain. And our rabbis explain that it really should be plural. It should say Vayachanu, not Vayichan, which is singular. And Rashi makes the most fabulous comment, which every Jew knows, Ki ish echad b'lev echad, like one person with one heart. We made an assumption. When we saw that we had achieved that kind of unity, when we understood that God was giving us a Torah that was going to be the same for every person, when we knew that this was now the crescendo of leaving Mitzrayim, was standing at the foot of the mountain to be able to receive the Torah, we made an assumption that individual service of God was finished. It was done. We are now a community. We're ish echad kelev echad. We're one entity, one organism. We are completely connected into each other, and therefore, as an organism, we are obligated to be connected and to serve God. And when God said, will you take the Torah? Our response was, na'aseh. We will do. We will do. As a community, every one of us shedding our own sense of individuality. And then Moshe Rabbeinu builds a mizbeach. And that further knocks and drives that idea home, that you, the Jewish people, you're a mizbeach. You take all your dynamism, you take all your individuality, and you pull it together to make this offering upon which you make the sacrifice, upon which you make the offering of karav, of closeness to God, in which you become united as one community. Naaseh, we will do. But then we looked at it, and Moshe Rabbeinu looked at it and said, but you have to remember that in order to make a community needs to be made of individuals. And Moshe Rabbeinu builds 12 matzevos for each and every tribe. Because there are 12 different flavors of a personality. There's a Reuven personality. There's a Shimon personality. There is a Levi personality. There's a Yehuda personality. And every single one of those personalities are intermingled with each other. And there are 144 different permutations of those kinds of personalities. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu builds 144 altars to send the message to the people that it's not just about communal service of God, but that you've got to find your own sense, your own personality, your own strength. And you've got to deal and you've got to develop that strength of yours. But that strength of yours has to be developed not outside, not separated from a community, but within the context of the community. And first, Moshe Rabbeinu builds the Mizbeach, and then after the Mizbeach, he builds the monuments, he builds the Matzeva. Nobody else needed to send that message. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they built them separately. When they needed to send the message of a Matzeva, they built a Matzeva. When they needed to send the message of the Mizbeach, they built the Mizbeach. But Moshe Rabbeinu needed to send them that dual message, that yes, you are a Mizbeach, you are a Matzeva, but the Matzeva has only a connection when it's connected to the Mizbeach, when it's connected to the whole. First, you're a member of a community, and now within that context of a community, of a congregation called Israel, now you have to develop yourself as a matseva, develop yourself with your own individual power and your own individual personality, your own individual koach. And what happened immediately after that? Immediately after that, we said, Naaseh v'nishma. Because now we were ready not only to answer as a community, but now we recognize that developing our own selves is also critical. Naaseh was a communal response. Nishma, I will hear. Not nishma'u, not we will hear, but I will hear. As an individual, I will take it inside. I will assimilate this, but through the message of the community. You know, we learned in Mishnah, Al Tifresh min hatzibur, that you're not allowed to separate yourself from a community. It's considered separating oneself from a community, doing something different than the community, standing on the outside is considered a terrible thing. How is that not a contradiction to this, though? Standing to being an individual, this is telling me that being an individual is critical. Not losing your sense of self, not losing your personality and who you are, that's critical. So how could you tell me that Al Tifresh min hatzibur, that I shouldn't leave the tzibur? There are times I have to leave the tzibur. There are times I have to separate myself. Very often people think that to develop ourselves as individuals, we need to be different than everybody else. Very often what happens is that we're different than one group, but we become the same as another group. So in our desire to achieve individuality, we're really not individuals, we're just part of another group. I remember once walking with my father I remember why. We spent the Shabbos in Manhattan, in Greenwich Village. And my uncle had a shul in Greenwich Village, some bar mitzvah, whatever. So we spent the Shabbos. And I remember walking around, and I was a very sheltered Long Island kid who went to Jewish day school. The biggest hippie I saw was on television, but here you're walking the streets, and I mean, the stuff that I saw was like, whoa. And my father, I remember he made a comment. A lot of people, wearing dungarees in my father's world, in his culture. Walking around in dungarees was what you did when you were shoveling dung in the farm, or you were building a building. You didn't walk in public in a pair of dungarees. And my father wasn't a fancy person. He was a regular. He worked with his hands. I mean, he was a very creative and physical person. But nevertheless, dungarees had a certain image to him. So I remember him telling me I was a little kid, as if I would really understand. I guess he knew I wouldn't understand, but someday it would go into my head. But he said, all these people are trying to be individuals, and they're trying to to buck the system. He says, but all they've done is they've created their own system. And they've left this one and they've attached themselves to that one. That's not called individuality. Nor is individuality stepping out of the system and then just living by your own drummer. That's just weird. But staying within the system and developing yourself within the system, finding your strengths within that system, finding your kochos inside of that system, that's individuality. That everybody stands at the same time and everybody sits at the same time, everybody keeps Shabbos on the same time, everybody eats the same kind of food, everybody does the same kind of chesed. That's our system. That's Nasa. That's the Mizbeach. But that everybody does it their way, with their personality and with their strengths, and that because of that, everyone is going to have their thing that they focus on. The mitzvah that sits in the front of my eyes is not necessarily the mitzvah that sits in the front of yours. And what you dedicate your life to is not necessarily what I put my energy into. But it's all part of the same system. I'm not leaving the system in order to be able to develop my individuality. I'm developing my individuality within the system. And this section of the Torah is no longer an afterthought to last week's Parsha. It is actually the underpinnings and the most critical aspect of the story of the giving of the Torah. the building of the Mizbeach and the building of the Matseva sets to us a critical example that that's the way we need to exist as Jews, that we need to feel a sense of Klal Yisrael. We're part of the larger Jewish people. But nevertheless, even though we're part of a klal, within that klal, I need to find myself. I need to find my strength. I need to find my mission. Because everyone has a mission within the larger context of this entity called Klal Yisrael. And it was only then when Moshe Rabbeinu showed us visually the Mizbeach and the Matseva so that we could get this message clearly, only then were we prepared to say, Naaseh v'nishma. We will do as a community, but we will also have the strength and ability to be able to do as individuals, to be able to find ourselves and to be able to develop ourselves as individuals. Beautiful. That is, I'll tell you that this message is such a fundamental message that it needs to be reincorporated into the story of the giving of the Torah. Now it is in the Torah, of course, but for somehow in the classroom and on the and on the parent and the Zayd and Baba's knees, somehow this part of the story has gotten lost. But this part of the story is the most critical part of the story. That what is it about being part of the Jewish nation? It's, yes, we're part of a Jewish nation, but we're also individuals. And don't ever lose, we can never lose our own sense of individuality. We don't gain that individuality by walking away from the group. We gain it by connecting ourselves to the group and developing our own strengths. Okay. My thoughts. Something to chew over. My suggestion is look at that section in the Torah, because I feel like it's a, I want to say forgotten section of the Torah. It's chapter 24, which is at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, which is separated by a lot of Torah to the actual story of the giving of the Torah, which was in last week's Parsha. Okay. Thank you very much. Everybody should have a beautiful, wonderful, amazing, awesome Shabbos. And Yetz Hashem Sunday, big day Sunday. In Yetz Hashem, we're going to finish chapter 5. Now, somebody had emailed me, Jackie emailed me, with a suggestion or with a thought of what would be a nice thing to learn after we finish Pirkei Avos. Because the end, it looks like the end is in sight. We have one more chapter. And I happen to think that the suggestion that was made is beautiful, but we have plenty of time to discuss it, because my main response was, don't let the little light you see at the end of the tunnel fool you. There is no light yet at the end of the tunnel, because that chapter takes the longest to learn, because there are many things in that chapter that require multiple shiurim, because they need to be broken down to the component parts. And there is one Mishnah in that chapter that is in fact made up of 48 pieces. It's called the 48 Ways of Wisdom, which are in the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avos. And even if we were to do 3 or 4 a week, you're still talking about 3 or 4 a day, excuse me, you're still talking about multiple weeks. So yes, the end is in sight in numbers. We're getting the last chapter of Pirkei Avos, but just relax, because, relax, make yourself comfortable. You're going to be here for a while, because we still have a bunch of work to do until we get to the end of Pirkei Avos. And a lot of the 6th chapter is the most stunning chapter of Pirkei Avos. Okay. Thank you all very much. Have a beautiful Shabbos. Great to see everybody.
What was the suggestion?
Thank you.
The suggestion was Mishlei, studying Mishlei, which is Proverbs, which is I have to say, a favorite of mine. I started Mishlei maybe 10 years ago, and I hit chapter, and I was saying Mishlei once a week. I think in 10 years I hit chapter 20, 19 or 20. I mean, it's but again, such basic human things, and just how to be a human, and how to behave in the world. And it's really amazing. Anyway, we do have plenty of time to talk about it, and we will. But we can float that. We can float that now. Okay,
Rabbi,
yes.
Can I have a question
Sure.
via email? No, I'm going to send you an email.
Okay, sure, and I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much. Good
Okay.
Shabbos.
My pleasure. Have a good Shabbos, everyone.
Bye.
Good Shabbos, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
You as well. Good
Good
job, Rabbi.
Shabbos.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay well.
My pleasure.
Pleasure.